is America being set up for an Arab Spring? And I wrote him back. I said, let's change that topic to something more relevant. Is America being set up for an American Spring? All right, and you know, I talk to my sister once a week. It's kind of important, keep family. And what she said to me is, from the reporting there, you guys are in the middle of a civil war. And I couldn't disagree. You've got black against cops, whites being stirred in there, but nonetheless masterfully stirred up. Now, look, let's face it. This is a wave of killing that even by American standards isn't normal. And I was going to ask Bill about this. Look, the key is that once police authorities eroded, the results can be chaos. Like him or don't like him, you have to have someone, you know, handing out traffic tickets at the very minimum. But in general, if you view your police as your enemy, it ain't good. All right? Now, I've got, you know, the guest before, I was listening to the show, he has his suspicions. Apparently, the night before the attack on Dallas, the governor of Texas was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where he was scalded. Third-degree burns, that's the real bad stuff. What I got from them is the guy's in a wheelchair. How do you get third-degree burns from a wheelchair? There's so many stories, and from what angle you take them from, I suppose, is how you view life. Now, I'm hoping my producer's trying to get Bill on, and this is just a terrible mix-up. And by the way, I could be knocked off by a storm. My area's got hail as big as golf balls and all that. So I told him ahead of time, look, I've got a cell phone. If I lose this line, I've got another line. I'll try and get the show going. But that's neither here nor there. You have to look. Now, from my point of view, all right, let's start with, you know, a few of the recent crimes. I mean, last night I turned on TV, a guy takes the gun from a bailiff in a Michigan courthouse and kills 2 cops. That's just the latest in a long, long line of well, look, Minnesota. I'm not going to go through all the police killings caught on somebody's cell phone that stirred up the violence. But I got to tell you, it's been served masterfully. Masterfully. You've got riots. The rioters in Minnesota, they knock out a cop with a cement block thrown from a bridge. There's arrests all over the place. You're almost heading to 1967. Just about there now. Now, I'm going to ask a few questions of my own. And again, the program before me was pretty good at telling me things I didn't know. So I'm not the only one looking out here. Lots of things don't add up. But I'm going to go through the basic stuff. All right? And again, without a guest, I'm not just saying me, all right? But I did take some notes. This is not an Arab Spring. Orlando, the guy was shouting all kinds of Arab stuff. Not in Dallas, but he served in Afghanistan. You join the military, something happens to you, all right? If you're of the right character, they turn you into the wrong character. Now, look, in Dallas, the guy was discharged from the military for harassment. So how come he gets a gun license? There's no record that he was discharged from the military and has no right to be put a dangerous weapon in his hands. Why did he get the gun? But then you start looking at Orlando, which was a kind of different crime. It was against Latino homosexuals. They weren't cops this time. It was another community. Well, let's just put it this way. All reports say that the Orlando shooter was 3 times under FBI surveillance. How come he got a gun license? Look, people, I'm viewing it from a different scope than the previous show, but still the same thing. How come, if he was under FBI surveillance 3 times, how come he could get a gun license? If that makes sense to any of you, and I hope it does, if I'm going to guess, it's because Bill Federer sent me an email, his topic, is America being set up for an Arab Spring? This isn't Arab, this is homegrown, right? Now, look, the problem, once again, is Bill Federer, and I was going to discuss this with him. He wrote this article that the founding fathers, a whole bunch of them, were slave owners. And, well, not excusing it, he justified it. And I was going to go into his articles. How do you justify being a slave? Even if you're back in 1776, you know, there is a right from wrong. And eventually you went to civil war. Not at the beginning, it wasn't about slavery, but by the middle, it was about slavery. You're a founding father. Come on, it's a new country. Why didn't they give up their slaves? Free them. Give them jobs. I was waiting for his answer, all right? The answer was undoubtedly those were the times, and everyone was viewed differently, and slavery wasn't a bad thing. It was the machinery of the time, all that kind of stuff. I guess he didn't want to answer that. I'm hoping I hope he shows up. The issue isn't the Arab Spring right now. The issue is behind the scenes. It's very American. All right? Now, I don't know who killed. I don't have a clue last night in Michigan who was the killer of the bailiffs and all this. But what a month for death. All right? What a month. And I wasn't going to get him. Well, I'm sure he would have explained that it's all being set up for an Arab Spring. And I'm saying to you guys, behind the scenes, you know what? All right. If you were the assassin in Dallas, why would you be pissed off? The police chief is black. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. Why, of all places, why would you kill policemen who were under the authority of a black chief? Folks, if anyone asked that, I'm sure many, many people asked that. It wasn't unfair. They were subservient to a black. So why do you shoot the cops? Good gosh. I hear noises like somebody's phoning. Bill, is that you? and nobody's answering. All right, folks, just to explain...
Bill Federer with AmericanMinute.com. Thank you.
I assume that was a message, and he's not answering his phone. So I'm going to go back to my original assumption that we're not in the midst. By the way, our next guest, Don Boyd, I hope he shows he does dive into the real threat is Islam. Well, I'm telling you right now what's going on in the States has been a tiny weeny bit of Islam and a whole bunch of black cop white. Bill, is that you?
Yes, yes.
All right, I just wung it for the first 15 minutes of our show.
I apologize.
I guess you didn't hear my winging, huh?
I apologize, no.
All righty, then. I'm not going to... Well, what the heck? Maybe I will. You sent an email that said, is America being set up for an Arab Spring? And I just explained that what's going on right now is a born and bred in American revolution. At least, well, my sister thinks it's civil war, and it sure looks that way to outsiders. Not Arab. This is American. How do you react?
Right. Well, I have some comments. Would it be okay if I started them?
Yeah, it sure would. I'm sure tired of doing this by myself. Go to it.
Well, I have put together a book. It's called Rise of the Tyrant, and I go of British history from the beginning of writing around 3,000 or 4,000 BC with Sumerian cuneiform and clay tablets on the Mesopotamian Valley. Nimrod, the Tower of Babel, but you got 2,000 years and 33 major Egyptian dynasties ruled by pharaohs, 5,000 years, 18 major Chinese dynasties ruled by emperors, Cyrus of Persia, Darius, Indian Maharajas, Alexander the Great, Roman emperors, Byzantine emperors, Muslim sultans, African chieftains, King Kamehameha, Montezuma, King of Spain, France, and Austria. What's the one thing that's in common? The most common form of government in all of recorded human history is a king. Power wants to concentrate into the hands of one person. It's like a pull of a magnet, it's like a law of gravity. I think it goes back to the fall in the garden and Cain, kill, and Abel, and selfishness coming into the human DNA. So you put some babies in a playpen, one of them will take the rattle from the others. You put some kids on a playground, one of them will be the bully hugging the ball. Put some people in the woods.
There is putting one in one corner, the other in the other corner, and setting them upon each other, which is what I think is going on right now.
Yeah, and so we see there's this natural trend for power to want to concentrate. And when it does, if you are friends with the king, you're more equal. If you are not friends with the king, you are less equal. You are an enemy of the king, you're dead, or you're a slave. And so this is the trend. Now, very rarely do we see countries get a chance to rule themselves without a king. Matter of fact, the first instance of an entire nation ruling itself without a king was ancient Israel. Around 400 BC, Israel comes out of Egypt where they had pharaohs. They come into the promised land. Those first 400 years, no king. Everyone was equal before the law. This is the beginning of the concept of equality. There's no royal family to butter up next to. Right? The law said there's no respect of persons in judgment. Rich or poor, everyone's the same. Israel.
Saul and I recall them all being kings.
Say it one more time.
David.
Right. Well, for the first 400 years before King Saul, there was no king, and everyone was equal before the law. And the law said there's no respect of persons in judgment. Even the stranger living amongst you is under the same law that you're under. So this was revolutionary in the world. The whole rest of the world is kings. In Israel, they had no king for 400 years, no royal family to butter up next to. And so this is the beginning of the concept of equality on planet Earth. And then Israel was the first nation with private land ownership. Matter of fact, wherever there's a king, you never really own the land. It is always conditional of you staying on the nice side of the king. Well, in Israel, the land was permanently titled to the families. if they got in a pinch and sold it, every 50 years it reverted back to the family. And so this prevented a dictator from gathering up all the land and putting the people back into slavery. Now, if you can own land...
Moses led the Jews out of Egypt about 3200 BC. That's, in general, 3200 is the beginning of freedom. I don't recall 400 years after that, 400 years of democracy. I don't recall that in our history.
Right. Well, most of I've spent years researching all the, there's lots of different dates. They usually date Abraham around 1900 BC, and then they date the Exodus around 1400 BC, give or take a couple centuries. But that's the general. And so all the way up until about 1000 BC is when they got David and Solomon. So you had from 1400 to 1000 BC, and during that period, there was no king. Anyone could be raised up in leadership. Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, even Deborah. Here's a woman who got to be a leader in Israel simply because she knew the law and she was honest, and people made their way all the way across the country. She'd sit under a tree and decide their cases. So where else in the world could a woman become a leader, not being related to a pharaoh or a king? And then Israel, again, they call it the promised land because the people owned the land. It was titled to the families, not a king. And so Israel was the first nation with no standing army. You have a king, he has an army to enforce his will. In ancient Israel, every man was in the militia and armed and ready at a moment's notice to defend his family and his community. Okay, Israel was the...
dating that I recall solving about 1200. All right, fair enough. We're going with your dating. There's lots of different scholars, and they'll date it lots of different centuries. It sort of goes, they say, because Egypt would list their pharaohs, and then they realized that many times an older pharaoh would be old, and his son would start his reign while the dad was still alive, and so they would overlap. And so we think, okay, this one reigns, he dies, the next one picks up. We think it's a clear-cut transition. No, so there's these overlapping dynasties, so it messes up the dating system. So it is hard to nail the exact date down. But a general consensus, probably about 75% of the scholars think it was around 1400 BC. But when they came out of Egypt. So Israel got to choose their own leaders. So Moses goes to the children. Those were the days we ended up with dynasties. Well,
they had a patriarchal system, right? So the dad was the head of the family, and then the different dads were the elders, and they would sit at the city gates and decide the cases. And then the city would elect someone to go to Congress, to go to the Sanhedrin, which was the collection of all the leaders of all the tribes. And so it was a bottom-up form of government. It wasn't a king deciding who's going to be in charge. And so Moses in Deuteronomy 1 says, "Take you, wise men, and known among your tribes, and bring them to me, and I will make them rulers over you." This was an election process. They would take the ones they knew amongst their own tribes that fear God, hate covetousness, and able men of truth. And so it was a bottom-up form of government. Israel was the first nation with no prisons. It wasn't like Egypt where Joseph wasted away in prison.
Did something wrong. They probably flogged you.
Well, right. As soon as there was a crime, they would immediately bring you to the gate of the city, gather the elders together, and have the trial right then and there. There was a city of refuge you could run away to, but it was very swift, and they didn't have prisons like Joseph wasted away in an Egyptian dungeon for a couple of years. Israel had a bureaucracy-free welfare system. So it was not like Egypt where you sold your soul to the Pharaoh for a handout of grain. In Israel, when somebody harvested their field, they left the gleanings for the poor people to pick through. This way, the poor were taken care of without some political leader collecting everything and doling it back out to those who can help them stay in power. Israel was the first nation that could read. That's right. When you look at the ancient alphabets in Sumeria, they had 1,500 cuneiform characters. Now, I don't know about you, but memorizing 1,500 anything is pretty hard.
That would take you about to the 9th grade before you even got half the writing system down.
And to make it worse, writing was only for the kings and their scribes to keep track of everything the king owned, his decrees, his genealogies, some astrology. The common people didn't have to read. Matter of fact, the first invention ever was the plow. And right, Cain was a tiller of the soil, and then people started hitting themselves with it, and so they turned them into weapons, and people would gravitate together into cities for protection. And when you get people together, something happens.
The plows were turned into plowshares. They were turned into something else.
Right. And so the people gravitated together into cities for protection. And when you get people together, someone ends up being the one to tell everybody else what to do. And at first, it's great. He helps protect everybody. They build a city. But then that person has kids and grandkids who claim to be this elite, superior class, and it turns into this hereditary monarchy with these kings that were basically gang leaders. And they claimed to own everything, and so they wanted to get accountants to count everything they owned. So in China, the emperors had scribes that devised a way of counting with knots in ropes. They would have a warehouse of grain and a rope hanging down, and they would tie the knots in the ropes, and that's how you could tell what was in there. Like an abacus with beads and rods. Well, in Sumeria, they had tokens in dishes. You have a bunch of warehouses, and in front there'd be these little dishes with little tokens, and then they would make markings in the tokens, and that turned into cuneiform. Sort of like if you tallied where you draw the lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a line across for 5. Right? And so the writing began, but it was only for the kings and the scribes. The common people did not read, and in fact were not allowed to read. The scribes kept the counting as their secret knowledge. In Egypt, the pharaohs and their scribes could read. They had 3,000 hieroglyphic characters, and the scribes kept them complicated on purpose as job security. They were needed to interpret these hieroglyphs.
No, those are the 3 beliefs. You know, I wrote a joke for the first half of the show, but we're not in that. It's about this African-American abusive husbands organization, Black Wives Matter. But I guess we won't get that out in time. We'll come back in 3 minutes.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app. for all of your mobile devices. Streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
New American Spring were in China making knots and ropes, and in excuse me?
I'm still here.
Oh, good. Away you go. Take it where you want. But at the end, I'm going to add something, but to it. Where are you heading with?
So Israel was the first instance that we have a record of a nation that ruled itself without a king. And it worked as long as the priests taught the law. When the priests stopped teaching the law, every man did what was right in their own eyes. It turned into chaos, and they got King Saul. And the people went to Samuel, and Samuel cries to the Lord, and the Lord said, they did not reject you, they rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Well, what did Saul do? He turned around and killed most of the priests, and then began to lay aside the law and decide to kill people and go after David and so forth. Anyway, what the point I'm making is, for a nation to rule itself without a king, they need to have internal morals and laws. And why would you follow an internal moral or law? What would make you deny a selfish tendency? Well, Israel had the necessary ingredient, a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he will hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal something, and you know you can get away with it. And then you think, God is watching. He wants me to be fair. He will hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates something in your head called a conscience. If everybody in the country believes God is watching, wants me to be fair, will hold me accountable, everybody is motivated to follow these internal morals, and you can have complete order in society with no policemen following everybody around. But if you get rid...
Yes, could I have a debate with you on this? The most religious Okay, you know what? If you think that's what it takes to run a society, go to it. I think there's a certain decency that your God can justify indecency. It's the whole history.
Oh, all right. Well, if I can, I'll come to my point, and then we can come back. But if you get rid of this God, then why follow these internal morals? Some will out of social habit and acceptance, but others will say, forget this. If there's no God and this life is all there is, I'm going to steal, rob, smash windows, set buildings on fire, have mobs in the street, kill police officers, and then everybody's going to say, government, please restore order. And the government will come in with militarized police and go house to house and collect everybody's guns, and yeah, they'll restore order, but when the dust settles, you'll have fundamentally transformed your country from the people ruling themselves back to a king. And so that's the first story we have in world history of a nation that ruled itself without a king for 400 years, and then how it went back to King Saul. And then in my book, I go through Athens, and then I go through Rome and how they tried to have democracies and republics, but, Philip of Macedon took over Athens, and Julius Caesar found a way to make himself dictator for life in Rome. But then we come all the way up to the most powerful king in world history was the King of England. And he controlled 13 million square miles, 500 million people, all of India, a quarter of the world's population right there, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, and America. And America's founders decide they're going to break away from the most powerful king, and they have no army and no navy, just a bunch of courageous people with faith. And when America's founders get the chance, they want to set up a government that is as far away from a king as possible. They take the power of a king, separate it into 3 branches, separate it federal to state level, tie up this federal Frankenstein with 10 handcuffs we call the first 10 amendments. All the Constitution is a bunch of hurdles to prevent the rubber band from snapping back into the hands of a king. And it worked, but unfortunately we see a trend. In times of crises, people will surrender their freedoms. And so Washington's farewell address said this. He said, usurpation. Now that's doing something the government is not authorized to do, but people let him get away with it. Usurpation, though in one instance is the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. What do I mean? Well, it was good that Lincoln wanted to end slavery, but in the process, a lot of rights were usurped away from the states and into the hands of the federal government. It was good that Franklin Roosevelt wanted to get us through the Depression, but he concentrated power with his New Deal programs. It was good that Lyndon Johnson wanted to end poverty, but he concentrated power with his Great Society welfare state programs. It was good that President Bush wanted to make sure there were no more terrorist attacks, but he concentrated power with the NSA and the Homeland Security. And now we have a president, no matter what the crisis is, the answer is the same. Surrender your rights and freedoms to him. And so we're seeing this is a trend like gravity.
I want to, first of all, plug your book. Let's get this out of the way. By the way, folks, I'm going to plug me first. Believe me, I'm a struggling writer, and all my books are at lulu.com. That's www.lulu.com. In the right-hand corner, it says, well, just write my last name in there, books, and then you go to CHAMISH. My website is www.barrychamish.com. Your turn now, Bill.
Oh, my website is AmericanMinute.com. AmericanMinute.com. I send out a free daily email, and the book I'm talking about is called Rise of the Tyrant. Rise of the Tyrant. And the point that I'm getting to is that power wants to concentrate into the hands of a king. It's like the Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf tells Frodo, always remember, Frodo, the ring is trying to get back to its master. It wants to be found. Power wants to concentrate. But there are political philosophers that want to speed it along, like Machiavelli and Hegel and Karl Marx and Saul Alinsky. So let's look at Italy 500 years ago.
Of all names, Marx and Saul Alinsky? All right, what the heck?
So we See, 500 years ago, Italy was a bunch of city-states: Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and they always fought. And Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop the infighting between these city-states. So Machiavelli writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if a prince wanted to conquer a city in his quest to unify Italy, and the people didn't want him to conquer them, they'd hate him. But if that prince paid criminals to kill cows and burn barns and create crisis and terror, the people would cry out for help. The prince would come in and kill the very criminals he bribed. Nobody would know the better for it, and they'd praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire, and then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher, and they'll pay anything for it and thank you for being there. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on a crisis to consolidate power, to have it go from the people back to a king. Well, that inspired someone named Hegel, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Lived in Germany, and when Napoleon conquered Prussia, a German province, so easily, the king said, we can't let that happen again. We need to strengthen the state. And so Hegel said the state is God walking on earth. And Hegel came up with a thing called Hegelian dialectics. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's a triangle. One corner is
university in the philosophy department. In every one of them is Hegelian dialectics. I suppose my listeners should get a clue of what he was getting at. Go to it.
So the Hegelian dialectics is a triangle. One corner is a thesis, the opposite corner is an antithesis, and the top corner is a synthesis. So you start off at the first corner, you create a crisis, you create an antithesis, you create a problem that's real bad. Then everybody is happy to settle for your answer that's half as bad, right? That's the synthesis. Then that becomes the new thesis, and you create another problem that's real bad, and then everybody's happy to settle for your answer that's half as bad. You do that over and over again until the people give up their freedoms and you're back to a king. And so Karl Marx took this and applied it to politics. And how do you create the antithesis? How do you create a problem that's real bad? You send in agitators, agent provocateurs, provoking agents. You send in community organizers, labor organizers, and their goal to have domestic crises. And they would find the fault lines, the tension lines, the grievances right under the surface. And they would stir up the people to riot and to smash windows and to cause crime. And when there's random bloodshed, everybody begs the government to step in and restore order. And when they do...
What is happening? Turn to... Look, you want to talk about it. Is America having an Arab Spring? You've got an American Spring. Is this what's happening in America? They're creating the crises and they're creating the solutions.
Right. And so Karl Marx inspired Saul Alinsky. Now, who was Saul Alinsky? He rode around with Al Capone's hitmen in Chicago, Frank Nitti, and saw how all you had to do was kill a few people, smash a few windows, and the whole neighborhood would submit to the mob and pay extortion protection money. And so Saul Alinsky applied this to politics. And Hillary Clinton did her senior thesis at Wellesley College on Saul Alinsky. And President Obama was a Saul Alinsky community organizer in Chicago. And so Saul Alinsky says the community organizer's job is to rub raw the resentments of the people of the community, fan the flames of hostility to the point of overt expression. A community organizer must seek out controversy rather than avoid it. For unless there is controversy, the people are not motivated enough to act. He says the community organizer must lead his forces into conflict. And so what happens is you see that the politics being played out today are these tactics, these Hegelian dialectics, this idea of intentionally creating crises. So we see the president has been allowing illegal aliens to come across the southern border, and a large percentage of them are what's called OTMs, other than Mexicans. They're Somalis, Pakistanis, Sudanese. They're Muslims. They're finding Korans and prayer rugs in the Arizona desert. Hugo Chavez had been bringing Muslim terrorists over from Iran to Venezuela, teaching them Spanish and sending them north. And with all their money, they've infiltrated the drug gangs, and they're coming across the southern borders in floods and going to cities all around the country. And then we see
in America, it's been tried and true, bred and born American blacks getting shot by cops, and it's being recorded, and it's stirring up whole communities, and then you have mass murders. One claimed to be doing it on behalf of Islam. That's the one exception. All the rest is black-white stuff.
And then we see that the prisons have been turned into places where black men are forced to convert to Islam. And I've talked to them. If they don't convert, they get targeted. And so the prison system is becoming a recruiting center to recruit blacks into Islam. Then they release these prisoners. They go into the inner cities, and you have these trained gang people. And then we see the Syrian Muslim refugees being brought into America with no efforts to vet them. And so even the FBI says there's no way to keep out ISIS. And they're being spread out into cities all across America without the states and the local authorities being even told about it. And so now we see there's an agenda. Somebody's...
But what do you say to this? And by the way, I buy into it, that ISIS was created by the United States Special Forces, along with the Israelis, I'm ashamed to say, in northern Jordan, supposedly at the beginning to bring down Bashar Assad, but it spread and became this massive movement. It was created by your other government. It was created by you.
Right, and so we look at when ISIS was being created, they said to President Obama, why didn't you bomb the oil fields that ISIS was using to sell oil to fund themselves? And Obama said, well, we don't want to create an environmental crisis. Really? You're letting ISIS get funded? And then we see the president let 5 Muslim generals go from Guantanamo Bay in exchange for a defector, and they go over and lead ISIS. And our president had declared war in Iraq and Afghanistan over and brought the American troops home, but he left the military bases, and now the ISIS has taken the weapons and the Humvees and the Jeeps and the machine guns, and then we rush through funding to train good Muslims to fight bad Muslims. As soon as they get armed and trained, they join ISIS. And then Susan Rice was micromanaging our airstrikes and giving them a week's notice so they can vacate the buildings. So we're bombing empty buildings, and then we're ally, quote-unquote, Turkey.
They're bombing buildings with Doctors for Peace.
Yeah.
Very openly. Look,
right,
it's good. Finally, we're getting to the original point. This whole mess is of your own making, but it's not of you, and it's not of your people necessarily, but it's whoever is pulling the strings has made the mess.
Right. 100 years ago, they would have called it a coup d'etat, but the government has been usurped. And so we see that instead of having a war on terror, our foreign policy is actually behind us. So the Muslim Brotherhood's goal is to reestablish the caliphate, the Islamic State, the ISIS. And we see that President Obama fired Mubarak in Egypt, and then he, on his own, takes out Gaddafi in Libya. America was not at war with Libya, yet the American president knocks off the leader of a nation, and then we find, that's to let democracy in. Well, a couple of years have gone by.
You forgot the part where he elects his own ambassador. He does not rescue when it was within his power to rescue the ambassadors to Libya and Benghazi. He lets them get shot. It gets really... All right, good.
And And then we find a lot of Hillary's emails, as seen by the Freedom of Information Act requests that Judicial Watch got. Hillary's emails that she doesn't want people to see, it was a gun-running operation. The guns that were used to get rid of Gaddafi in Libya were being moved to Syria to arm these Muslim Brotherhood people trained by America to take out Assad. And when Russia came to Assad's rescue, these Muslim Brotherhood people, armed and trained by America, killed the Christians and the Yazidis and have this, what John Kerry called a genocide, using American guns. But now we see these displaced Syrians. A good percentage of them are legitimately displaced, but amongst them are the Muslim Brotherhood, the ISIS members, and they're infiltrating Europe, and they're infiltrating America. And so they're being brought across. And so we see that we used to think of communist tactics on one side and Islam on the other side. Now we've seen a cross-pollination. We've seen a coming together of Islamic motivation using communist agitating tactics. And it's coming to a head in America. And so the president...
Coming to a head in Europe.
And in Europe, yes.
There's been no Paris, there's been no Brussels. So far, it's pure American. So far.
Right, and so when you begin to see how the Marxist, Machiavellian, Hegelian strategy is you need crises in order for the government to have an excuse to usurp power. Now we've got the means of making crises all across the country. And what is the response? Well, and even Castro said that revolution needs the antithesis. And so if the federal government previously had said we are going to come in and take over all of the local police departments, the people in America would have said no. But if you orchestrate these attacks and the police get shot, the response is our local police departments are inadequate. We need to federalize them. We need to have the Department of Justice take over. We need to give the president a standing army.
Is that what's coming? Now, look, it hasn't happened yet. Did you foresee that coming?
From all the history I've seen, that is the game plan. And so if and when the president has the Department of Justice, it's called Strong Cities Initiative, and it's called Shared Data Task Force. These are programs the Department of Justice has in place. They've recently taken over the Denver Police Department, the Baltimore Police Department, different police departments.
They have?
Yes. Yes, they come in offering to, quote-unquote, help.
That's a very major claim right now. You're saying they've actually taken over police departments.
Right. They come in offering to help and offering federal assistance. But what is effectively happening is the federal government is taking charge. And so let's look at the next step. There's more killings. And then the Democrats say the president needs to take away guns. The Democrats have a sit-in in Congress and lock up the Congress saying the president needs to do something. And the president will say, I'm giving Jay Johnson, head of Homeland Security, rights to suspend the Second Amendment, and would begin to go around collecting guns. What is going to happen next? Some people are not going to give up their guns, and there's going to be shooting, and it's going to break into chaos. And how are you going to have an election when people are being killed across the country? And so
I had my original point that, frankly, the guy in Dallas, I don't want to give his name. I'm sick of giving murderers' names. Nonetheless, he was discharged from the military for harassment. Now, how the hell did he get a legal gun? You got to have some controls, my goodness. Look what he did.
Well, there's a hardware problem and a software problem. And so what we're seeing is lots of people have guns. And if your software in your head, you're taught, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, everything's fine. But if you're taught to kill the infidel, if you're taught hate a certain race of people, then your software is corrupted. And you can use a knife, right? That Muslim that snuck into the Israeli girl's house and killed her with a knife, that young little girl.
And he shot 12, killed 5. A knife isn't that good. How did he get the gun? He was discharged from the military for harassment. Why wasn't he in every computer of every gun shop in America?
Oh, well, now we begin to see that, for example, the shooter in Orlando, he went to a gun shop and they...
surveillance 3 times. How come he could just go and buy a gun?
Well, you have to understand, our government gives guns to gangs. That's what all Fast and Furious about. That's why Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress. We have a government that gives guns to gangs. The Paris shooter, the killer in Paris, they found that the shooter in Paris was using a gun that came from the Fast and Furious guns that Eric Holder had given to the Mexican drug gangs. And we see Hillary Clinton. What was she doing? She was a gun-running operation. She was giving guns to these Muslims. And so we have a government that's doing this. Why? And so you can scratch your head and say, well, it's a gun problem. But then you realize, well, gee, the safest countries in the world are like Switzerland, where everybody owns a gun. And the most violent countries in the world are the ones where they've taken away everybody's guns. So it's not a gun problem. It is a software problem. It's what the people are taught. And then you have what Lenin called useful idiots. And so there are people that are being manipulated.
I'm going to interrupt because my eye's getting... In Israel, I had an M16, well, a year and a half regular service, another 11 and a half years military, whatever. I had an M16 1 month of the year. They vetted me. I couldn't just go out if I... Listen, anyone who is capable of using a gun wasn't given a gun. And so you didn't have mass killings. You have to understand,
who is going to decide who gets the guns or not? The government. Well, we have a government that is giving guns to gangs. So evidently the government is not the one to be deciding who should get the guns or not. Unfortunately, that's what it's come down to in America. So who do you trust? A government that has an agenda that seems to be usurp power away from the people? Or do you trust the people? And that was the...
Ordered out of the military for harassment is not someone who gets a gun. There, I said it.
Well, I agree. You should not have had a gun, but you have to understand, lawbreakers do not follow laws.
Well, if you can walk into any gun store and get a gun...
you don't have to go to a gun store. The criminals do not get guns from gun stores. They get them off the street. I just heard a story where in St. Louis, Missouri, by Shaw Park, there's a mosque. And they saw a car pull up in front of the mosque, and they're taking machine guns out of the trunk of the car and bringing them into the mosques. And there's more and more reports of mosques being armed. Islamabad, New York, where they have Muslim military training camps on American soil. And when they tell the FBI about it, they say, we're just monitoring it. And so the government knows that.
I saw him for Orlando and I saw him for Dallas. They bought legitimately, and anyone could, and there was no control. And look what happened.
Well, they run the database, and the database flags them, and the people contact the FBI, and the FBI says, sell the gun anyway. We're tracking them. And then they do the killings. So we have a breakdown of trust in the government, and the government is doing an agenda. And so we can blame the guns, which have been in the hands of decent Americans from the beginning of the country, or we can blame that there's an agenda being worked, and there's a software problem in the brains of people, and they need to go back to... If you get rid of Judeo-Christian morality, and you have Islamic morality says it's okay to use guns and kills infidels. And that's why lots of these cases in America and Paris and around the world, and that they're
those are the three. You came late, but we ended up with a very lively discussion, and that's good. That's really good. I'm glad you showed up. Don Boys is next. You've got my ire up. Maybe I'll do another good hour. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Listen, bye, all folks. We'll have Don Boys in 7 minutes.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.